I'm David Friedman. A few days ago, I found myself in a conversation with a stranger, defending my father's views about getting the government out of education. The man I was arguing with responded that education was too important to be left to the free market. It seemed to me he had it exactly backwards. If I had my choice, I'd like to get the government out of both delivering the mail and running the schools. But if I had to choose, I'd leave them with the mail. After all, if the government is in charge of delivering the mail, all that means is that some of our letters get lost. If governments are in charge of running the schools, that means that some of our children never learn to read. Education is important. It's not the only important thing. Consider the same argument applied to food. Surely food is a very important thing, and so if important things should be done by government, it seems to imply that the government ought to take over the supermarkets and the farms. The experiment has been tried. In the 1930s in Russia, Stalin collectivized agriculture. The government took over the schools, and several million Ukrainians starved to death. It reminds me of a conversation I had more than 20 years ago with a couple of Czech students in Vienna. That was the summer that Czechoslovakia tried a little prematurely to move away from communism, and the Russians invaded them. The students I was talking with had been caught outside of the country at the time of the invasion and were in Vienna trying to decide whether or not they should go home. And they were trying to explain to me what the Czech reformers were trying to do. As they described it, they wanted the best of capitalism and of socialism. And part of that was that they wanted to have free market prices for most goods, but have the government control the prices of a few essential commodities such as bread and milk. And my response, of course, was that if the free market was really better for the other things, then it was even more important to use the free market for essential commodities. I may have misunderstood them at that point, because I don't speak Czech and their English wasn't very good, but I think they said was, yes, that's what our professors say too. And I figured at that point I knew why the Russians invaded. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I agree that education is important, and it's far too important to be left to the government.
Human and political freedom has never existed and cannot exist without a large measure of economic freedom.
Freedom is making choices. What's best for me? What do I want to do? We all want to be free to choose.
No government official is telling these people what to do.
Parental control, parents choosing the teacher, parents monitoring the schooling.
Free to live your own life, pursue your own goals, chase your own rainbow, without the government breathing down on your neck or standing on your shoes.
Most of us would choose prosperity if we could, but what's the best road to that goal?
Free trade set off a process that revolutionized Japan and the lives of its people.
The Pilgrims tried a form of socialism over 300 years ago. Unfortunately for their fair-minded plans, they prospered only after they were allowed to keep for themselves all the food they grew.
Who says economic institutions don't matter?
We may dream of a perfect world, but we all know that's not possible.
Hong Kong is very far from utopia. Life is unfair. There's nothing fair about one man being born blind and another man being born with sight. I do not know any exception to the proposition that if you compare like with like, the freer the system, the better off the ordinary poor people have been.
Dr. Friedman has spent a lifetime studying freedom and prosperity. To him, the lessons of history are clear. People are better off making their own choices, better off not relying on government. Free to choose is a survival kit for you and for liberty.
These youngsters are beginning another day at one of America's public schools, Hyde Park High School in Boston. What happens when they pass through those doors is a vivid illustration of some of the problems facing America's schools. They have to pass through metal detectors. They're faced by security guards looking for hidden weapons. They're watched over by armed police.
Isn't that awful? What a way for kids to have to go to school through metal detectors and to be searched. What can they conceivably learn under such circumstances? Nobody is happy with this kind of education. The taxpayers surely aren't. This isn't cheap education. After all, those uniformed policemen, those metal detectors have to be paid for. And what about the broken windows and the torn school books and the smashed school equipment? The teachers who teach here don't like this kind of situation. The students don't like to come here to go to school. And most of all, the parents. They are the ones who get the worst deal. They pay taxes like the rest of us. And they are just as concerned about the kind of education that their kids get as the rest of us are. They know their kids are getting a bad education, but they feel trapped. Many of them can see no alternative but to continue sending their kids to schools like this.
To go back to the beginning, it all started with the fine idea that every child should have a chance to learn his 3 R's.
Sometimes in June, when it gets hot, the kids come out in the yard to do their lessons, all 15 of them, ages 5 to 13, along with their teacher. This is the last one-room schoolhouse still operating in the state of Vermont. That is the way it used to be. Parental control, parents choosing the teacher, parents monitoring the schooling, parents even getting together and chipping in to paint the schoolhouse as they did here just a few weeks ago. Parental concern is still here, as much in the slums of the big cities as in bucolic Vermont. But control by parents over the schooling of their children is today the exception, not the rule. Increasingly, schools have come under the control of centralized administrations, professional educators deciding what shall be taught, who shall do the teaching, and even what children shall go to what school. The people who lose most from this system are the poor and the disadvantaged in the large cities. They are simply stuck. They have no alternative.
Of course, if you're well off, you do have a choice. You can send your child to a private school, or you can move to an area where the public schools are excellent, as the parents of many of these students have done. These students are graduating from Weston High School in one of Boston's wealthier suburbs. Their parents pay taxes instead of tuition, and they certainly get better value for their money than do the parents in Hyde Park. That's partly because they've kept a good deal of control over the local schools, and in the process, they've managed to retain many of the virtues of the one-room schoolhouse.
Miss Andrew Green, Margaret R. Story.
Students here, like Barbara King, get the equivalent of a private education. They have excellent recreational facilities.
How does his plan differ?
They have a teaching staff that is dedicated and responsive to parents and students.
Barbara.
He's decisive. He's a red.
There's an atmosphere which encourages learning. Yet the cost per pupil here is no higher than in many of our inner city schools. The difference is that at Weston, it all goes for education and that the parents still retain a good deal of control. Unfortunately, most parents have lost control over how their tax money is spent. Ava Bell goes to Hyde Park High. Her parents, too, want her to have a good education. But many of the students here are not interested in schooling. And the teachers, however dedicated, soon lose heart in an atmosphere like this. Ava Bell's parents are certainly not getting value for their tax money.
I think it's a shame, really, that parents are being ripped off like we are. When I say, I'm talking about parents like me that work every day, scuffle to try to make ends meet. We send our kids to school hoping that they'll receive something that will benefit them in the future for when they go out here and compete in the job market. Unfortunately, that none of that is taking place out at Hyde Park.
Children like Ava are being shortchanged by a system that was designed to help them. But there are ways to give all parents more say over their children's schooling. This is a fundraising evening for schools supported by a voluntary organization, New York's Inner City Scholarship Fund. The prints that have brought people here have been loaned by a wealthy Japanese industrialist. Events like this have helped raise $2 million to finance Catholic parochial schools in New York. The people here are part of a long American tradition. The results of their private voluntary activities have been remarkable. This is one of the poorest neighborhoods in New York City, the Bronx. Yet this parochial school, supported by the fund, is a joy to visit.
Boys and girls, we're going to start the workshop now. You start out with task 1, put the words in alphabetical order. The answers are on my...
The youngsters here, from poor families, are at St. John Chrysostom's because their parents have picked this school. And their parents are paying some of the costs from their own pockets. The children are well behaved, eager to learn. The teachers are dedicated.
Behavior, consistent, contrary, destruction.
How old are you, honey?
6.
6. What are you working on? The cost per pupil here is far less than in the public schools. Yet on the average, the children are 2 grades ahead. That's because teachers and parents are free to choose how the children shall be taught. Private money has replaced tax money. And so control has been taken away from the bureaucrats and put back where it belongs. This doesn't work just for younger children. In the 60s, Harlem was devastated by riots. It was a hotbed of trouble. Many teenagers dropped out of school. Groups of concerned parents and teachers decided to do something about it. They used private funds to take over empty stores, and they set up what became known as storefront schools. One of the first and most successful was Harlem Prep. It was designed to cater to students for whom conventional education had failed.
Kennedy was a very dangerous president in the sense that he was excessively popular.
Many of the teachers didn't have the right pieces of paper to qualify for employment in public schools. That didn't stop them from doing a good job here. A lot of the students had been misfits and dropouts. Here they found the sort of teaching they wanted. After all, they had made a deliberate choice to come to Harlem Prep. It was a very successful school. Many students went on to college, and some to leading colleges. But after some years, the school ran short of cash. The Board of Education offered Ed Carpenter, the head of the school and one of its founders, tax money, provided he would conform to their regulations.
I love him, and we got along, and I know he's busy, but sometimes...
After a long battle to preserve independence, he finally gave in. The school was taken over by bureaucrats.
And I know he doesn't, but I was a little bit hurt.